Hey guys, Sko here. So I have this extremely niche idea for a video, and you're watching it. So I hope if the audience for this exists, I hope it is reaching you. This video is about why you, as a Marvel Champions player, should try Flesh and Blood, the trading card game. So this is not going to be a how to play Flesh and Blood, and it assumes you kind of understand how Marvel Champions works, but it's my pitch to you of what there's just a lot that the games have in common, and I haven't seen them compared very often. So I figured I would put it out because you might be more interested in this game than you think you are. So I wanted to start by pointing out the things that the game has in common with Marvel Champions, and then we're going to talk about what's different. But so some things that are in common is you have a identity. In Flesh and Blood, it's called a hero. So right now we have Katsu the Wanderer, who's my favorite character to play at the moment. You have a name, you have special abilities that are unique to you, you have a life total that if it reduces to 0, you will die. Usually that's 40. And there's a bunch of different heroes, and they're all unique. You also draw entire hands every turn. So unlike Magic or a wide variety of other trading card games, this is exactly like Marvel Champions in that you draw a whole hand of cards. You draw cards according to your hand size, which for almost every hero in the game is 4. So generally speaking, you're on a very strict economy of drawing 4 cards. And so it's very much like Marvel Champions in that every turn cycle is basically about looking at these 4 cards and evaluating, okay, how best can I use these cards? And you can use them in a variety of ways. In the Flesh and Blood, you can use the cards defensively as well as offensively. And that's true of Marvel. It's not super common to use cards defensively, but some heroes, and especially the protection aspect, can use cards during the villain phase to prevent what the villain is doing to you, and then the cards that are left over you can use in the player phase. Flesh and Blood, from a bird's eye view, works exactly the same way. You can use cards to defend against the attacks that your opponent sends at you during their turn, and then on your turn, you're able to use your cards offensively to attack your opponent. Another similarity, perhaps the greatest one, is that cards in your hand are your source of resources. So you do something called pitching in Flesh and Blood. So you pitch a card to generate the amount of resources in this top left-hand corner. So to give you a very brief card anatomy, you have the pitch value, how much resources a card generates. You have a cost, how much the card costs to actually play as itself. The block value, how much the card blocks for. And if the card happens to be an attack, then it will have a power value in this corner. But like Marvel, almost every card in the game can be pitched for some number of resources. So this is an example of a card that produces 1 resource, which is how a lot of cards in Marvel work. This is an example of a card that when pitched produces 3 resources. So obviously the curve is quite different. It's very common for cards to produce multiple resources at a time. And we'll talk a little bit about how this is a cool mechanic of the game. And another thing that Flesh and Blood has in common with Marvel, and the last thing that I'm going to touch on, is in this game, you are your hero. So my Katsu deck is extremely different from the opponent's deck that I'm going to be playing against, and I really feel like I am capturing the theme of a ninja. I'm sending in these little daggers. I have a lot of smoke and mirror and tricks. I'm trying to string in long combos of effects. And other heroes and other decks are going to be totally different. For example, I have over here an entirely different deck with an entirely different hero. This is Rhinar Reckless Rampage. He's a brute class. These 2 decks work entirely differently. And when I play Rhinar, I feel like I'm a brute. I'm swinging big attacks. I'm sometimes stumbling because I'm clumsy. I'm just like tanky and brutal and like making big numbers happen. And when I'm Katsu, I feel like I'm stealthy, I'm trying to be fast, I'm trying to be aggressive and run over the other hero. And there are a lot of heroes in the game. If I had done my research, I would have looked up how many there are, but there's quite a few, not as many as Marvel has, but every hero in Flesh and Blood feels very, very different, and you get to really embody them. In some ways, even more so than you do in Marvel Champions. So those are the things that this game has in common. So my basic pitch is that if you are into the idea of kind of embodying a hero, and you would enjoy doing that in the kind of game that Flesh and Blood is, then you should really check this game out. Some of the differences between Flesh and Blood and Marvel Champions. I'll start with some obvious ones. This game is competitive instead of cooperative. So it is a 1v1 situation. So if you're not interested in that, then obviously you're not interested in this game. There is a casual multiplayer format, which is, loosely analogous to Commander. I've never played it, and I really don't know how well it is received. We do know that PvE, cooperative content, is coming, and it is being developed by the team. So I know some of you will be way more on board with this game when that happens, and you know that I'll be telling you about it. But in the meantime, it's a competitive game, which for me is not a negative. I like to scratch that competitive itch. But if you hate that, then you'll hate it here. Also, of course, it's a collectible card game. Instead of Marvel Champions being a living card game, you have to buy packs of random cards, and you have to acquire cards on the secondary market. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, although I might make a whole video on it if there's enough interest. But you do not need to be too terrified about the cost of Flesh and Blood. It was kind of wild when it first started because it was out of print and there was a lot of silliness. But at this point, it is established. Flesh and Blood is certainly a reasonably priced game that you can play at a reasonable expense. I spent a long time playing the game at an extremely budget level, never buying a card that was a legendary rarity. I have since sprung for some, but I think I have spent fewer dollars on Flesh and Blood than I have on Marvel, actually, and I happily play multiple heroes in this game and enjoy myself a lot. So, as a very quick overview of the value structure of the game, a vast majority of cards you can buy secondhand very cheap. You can assemble a playable deck for very cheap. You can just go buy a blitz deck, which is basically a precon. Those are $10-ish. You can build a competitive-ish deck made entirely of commons and rares for very cheap. Even powerful Majestics, a lot of them are just a handful of dollars a piece. There exist fabled cards, which there's one fabled card per set, and those are the super valuable multiple $100 cards. You can just ignore those cards' existence. They do not affect, my real opinion is that they do not affect the outcome of games enough to be worth the money. They're even changing to making that card slot strictly cosmetic, at least they did in the last set, and I hope they're moving in that direction further. But just ignore fables, you don't need them. And the cards that are expensive and that remain expensive are legendary cards. And they vary widely in price. Some are as low as $20, some are above $100. All I want to tell you is that you can play the game without them, and I did for over a year. And also it's a fun investment because they're cards that get to start and play, and you get to use them every single game you play. So the bottom line there is I don't want you to be terrified of the cost of the game, but really my only pitch here is I think you should go out and buy a couple blitz decks and try this game out. So another difference between this game and Marvel Champions is that there are almost no allies. So there are not bodies in front of you to block for you. It is a directly one-on-one experience. So the cards that you're playing are not characters, like in Magic and lots of its clones. They're like attacks or moves that my character is literally applying to the other character. So it's kind of like your whole deck is mostly made up of attack events from Marvel. There's no chump blocking. There is a fairly rare card type called allies that some heroes interact with, but as a vast majority of the time, it's a direct confrontation where I'm sending attacks your way, you're blocking them, and then you're sending attacks back to me and I'm blocking them, which I think even helps make it feel like you're embodying the character that it is. Another thing that I gotta mention because I'm me is that the rules of Flesh and Blood are super tight, extremely well written. I am a judge and a Flesh and Blood rules nerd as well, and it is just so satisfying. Everything is clean, it works out well. There's an extremely nerdy, comprehensive rules document that lays things out. It's great. The rule situation, amazing, and I have no complaints about it. Another difference between Flesh and Blood and Marvel, something that's cool about it, which I alluded to earlier, is every card, almost every card in Flesh and Blood can do 3 things. So in Marvel, we're used to cards that can do 2 things. You can pitch them as resources, or you can play them as a card. Flesh and Blood, they can do 3. You can pitch them as resources, you can play them as the actual card, and you can defend for them. So there are defend with them. So there are 3 different axes for cards to get balanced on. So this is a card that is more expensive to play, and it doesn't generate as many resources, but it might be more powerful because of that, but it only blocks for 2. So when I'm building my deck, you have to care about how many cards you have of different pitch values, how many different costs you have. You need to make a curve of efficient hands, and you care about how well your cards block. And there are many, many different ways to use every hand. So looking at this hand here, there's a lot of different things I can do. I could be spending all 4 of these cards to block on the opponent's turn, basically passing my forthcoming turn. That would not be so good. I could choose, maybe I want to block with these 2 cards, and I'm going to spend these 2 cards on my turn, and so on and so forth. You get to make a wide network of micro decisions about how to spend the cards in your hand and how to build the cards into your deck in the first place. And I find that just super, super satisfying. So I want to talk about one really brilliant part of Flesh and Blood's design, which is part of the things that made me really fall in love with the game. Speaking of pitch values, a wide variety of the cards in the game, basically every common and a rare, come in what we colloquially refer to as a rainbow. Cards can pitch for different values, and the different pitch values are given a color coding that the bar at the top demonstrates. Usually this color coding is not super important, but red cards pitch for 1, yellow cards pitch for 2, and blue cards pitch for 3. And now you can see here that I'm holding the same card, Crane Dance, but pitching at all 3 values. And this is a thing for lots of cards. And you can include each color separately in your deck, up to 3 copies of each. So if you really like a particular card for some reason, you can actually play 9 copies of it. The difference between these cards, besides their pitch value, is the effectiveness of the card actually increases or decreases linearly. So the most common way that this will happen is in attack events like this, their power actually decreases as the pitch value increases. So when evaluating these cards, this card is a lot better to pitch than this card is. However, this card is much better to actually use for its effect because it has 3 power than this card is to use for its 1 power. So the implications of this basic design structure are really, really cool. So deck building in this game is amazing. So that's something I really, really commend it for. It is totally off the chain. There's not cards you're required to include. You get to craft your entire 60 card deck. So it's a lot more like Lord of the Rings LCG deck building than Marvel's. It just feels really free, really unchained. There's basically different pools of cards. There are generic cards, but then there's cards for the class, ninja, and there's cards for every other class, and there might be talents. So maybe you're a fiery ninja or an ice ninja, and you can use those kind of sub-types of cards. I made that up. There isn't an ice ninja yet. Nobody freak out. But and you can look at all the cards from all the different pools that your hero has access to. So Katsu can play ninja cards and generic cards. And you can craft it however you want. There's no limits beyond that. And you can play up to 9 of a particular effect. Maybe I want a card just to be a blue. Maybe I want a card so badly that I want to play 6 or 9 copies of it. And you get to play with all of these ratios. There's also a core mechanic of the game that cards recur. When you pitch cards for resources, they're going to end up on the bottom of your deck, and you're going to draw them later. So you care about the ratio of certain resource levels in your deck because of how they're going to come up later. Some really smart people actually plan the order of cards that they put on the bottom of your deck. My brain isn't big enough to do that, but some people supposedly do. And the last difference between Flesh and Blood and Marvel, at least the last one I'm going to talk about, is the existence of equipment. So what you're looking at here is actually how I begin the game. I don't have just my identity. I actually start with all this equipment out. So you get weapons. This is an example of me using 2 one-handed weapons. These are both daggers. You get a head equipment, a chest equipment, arms equipment, and a legs equipment. And there's a variety of these. I don't have to be using harmonized kodachis. There's actually other swords and daggers that I could be equipping my hero with, and there are lots of different equipment over here that I could be equipping myself with. These are usually the pieces that are legendary, by the way. But you start the game with this stuff in play, which is something that's so awesome about this game and really sets it apart from Magic, Marvel, and a lot of other card games, is you really start with powerful effects on the board. So if you've been playing Marvel and you've been enjoying the Mojo campaign and the fact that those campaign rewards let you start the game juiced up, then boy, I have the game for you. You should go to a store and check out Flesh and Blood. So I hope this made sense. I know this is a really, really specific video, so I bet a lot of people didn't watch it in its entirety, but if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. If you are at all interested in further analysis along these lines, there's more to be said. I can talk about how to get into the game or how to play the game, although there's lots of content like that all across YouTube. So I think you should check this game out. I think you should buy some Blitz decks, play them against each other, and if you do, tell me about it. I want to hear how it went. Peace.